Hello, everyone. My name is Sandro Carnicelli. I'm currently the head of the Marketing, Events and Tourism Group at the University of the West of Scotland. I'm also a senior lecturer in Events and Tourism.
Perfect, thank you. Nice to meet you, Sandro. We thought we would start with what is your background? So how did you get to where you are?
Yeah. Okay, so I came from a quite interdisciplinary approach. So actually, my undergraduate degree was in physical education, believe me or not. And the reason I went to do physical education was because when I was about 16, 17, I started to work with an auntie on educational trips. So I used to help her to take school kids to educational trips, and that was museums or outdoor recreation camps or any type of educational trips, just helping her with her business. So I really wanted to study something related to leisure. So I went to university, and I'm from Brazil, so originally from Brazil. And in Brazil, the field that studies leisure, it's physical education. So that's why I ended up going to study physical education. Then during my undergraduate, I developed lots of different research and work practice on with children and kids in general, and education. And then I did my master's. Then when I went to do my master, I started to look more to the relationship between leisure and tourism. And then I went to do my PhD in New Zealand, the University of Otago, where I was specifically looking to tourism. And my main work was looking to emotional management. So how people that are on frontline services manage emotions. I used as a specific case there, adventure tourism guides, but that was just the case. My main focus was about how people manage emotions, basically, in frontline services, and that's something that can be applied for tourism and events or other sectors. Then when I finished my PhD, I went back to Brazil and I was applying for jobs. And during my whole university, I had experience in terms of organizing conferences, organizing student events, organizing children events, and things like that. And a lot of the people that I worked with during my time at the university, during my master's, were now running large-scale conferences. And a lot of them working with incentive or conferences in this area. So then I started to help them to run those events, and that were events from, I think the biggest one I've done was 1,600 people, a week-long incentive conference, everything you can imagine. So that's how I started to then engage with events, still doing work with tourism, but then working in both sectors. And then I joined the University of the West of Scotland in 2011. And then as a lecturer, and then senior lecturer, and now leading the marketing, events and tourism program as unit. And we have, in that unit, we have 3 undergraduate programs. We have the marketing program, we have the events and the tourism program, and then we have 3 master's program, the MSc Digital Marketing, MSc International Marketing, and the MSc International Events Management. And it's a unit with almost 500 students, for over 400 students. So it's quite a lot of students and about 15 staff. So that's where we are.
You've done a bit of everything, really.
That's really cool.
You've definitely met a sort of a big range of people. And how did you find working with sort of in different sectors and different areas, and how did it compare to different countries as well? Obviously, you were saying you were in Brazil, New Zealand, and here. How has it been?
I think it's interesting. I think looking specifically to the event sector, there's huge differences, both in terms of how it's regulated, what are the organizations involved, and so on. Also, it's important to remember that There are a lot of changes in terms of legislation as well. So when I was working in Brazil, I was working specifically with medical conferences and medical industries, and there's huge changes in the last 10, 15 years on what those pharmaceutical industries can do and can't do in terms of ethics and so on. So it's been interesting to see the development of the sector and the development of the career as well. So in Brazil, I would say most of the people I know were all freelance stuff. Like we don't see, I don't see that as much here. But in Brazil, it's the norm. Everyone is freelancers. Everyone is they have to they invoice and they pay their own taxes and things like that. So the system is a bit different. We do see here a bit of that, but not as on the scale that we see in Brazil, which is way more. I would say almost like less regulated because of employment laws and things like that.
It's a big change. It's very different, but it shows that you've got a lot of experience and a lot of, you can show a big major picture for being a lecturer because you've had all that experience for different places and things. For seeing the sort of big change, how have you felt? Because you were my lecturer, so it's amazing. How do you feel things have changed from, for example, me being your student to now, and then especially with COVID, how teaching in this current climate has been?
I think there's teaching itself and teaching events has changed. So, you know, we always say that teaching events is, in theory, still new enough. So there's still a lot of theories being developed, understanding of the sector being developed. So in terms of event studies, we absorb a lot of the concepts and theories from other sectors. So we get a lot of theories from marketing, from business, from human resources management, but they all somehow apply to events. But events is also its own different universe, where a lot of these things sometimes, you know, because it's an experience economy and all the different changes that we see now, and a lot of the business theories, a lot of the marketing theories, a lot of the HRM elements don't always fully apply to events. So now with the development of the time, we see events academics, events researchers developing and adapting those theories from main areas into the events literature. So, you know, from when you came long time ago now, Rachel.
I'm not that old.
To now, there's way more literature, there's way more research done, there's way more books available for students to understand the sector. There is a better understanding of the different parts of the sector in terms of, you know, if you think about events industry, it's just so varied, so rich that, you know, we have now understanding of way more than we had 10, 15 years ago. Obviously, the COVID now has changed a lot. You know, in terms of Scotland, we've seen, you know, a change in terms of events management education, a lot because of the Commonwealth Games and the large events that we host. So we saw, you know, becoming very, very popular, the event sector. And obviously now with the COVID, things changed considerably. I still think that there is a lot of the discussions around events and how events could be hybrid, how events could be digital, were already in place before COVID. Obviously, the COVID just accelerated that to a speed that is very different. But it's not something that a lot of people in events were not thinking about or were not planning in terms of how things would change. And a lot of this debate was also because of climate change and other issues that we have in the world that, you know, I don't think the event sector can really close its eyes to it. So we need to embrace those things. We were embracing before, and now we need to understand that, well, with the pandemic, it's a public health issue. We just need to understand how we can develop our work, provide our services, but also contribute to an overall public health strategy.
Definitely, I agree with that. And I really agree with what you said about how things have changed very quickly. For me, being a student, there weren't very many books available. I went into the event industry quite naive and thought, this is a job that I want to do. That's my end goal. But it happened so quickly, and then you realise how massive the event industry actually is. And I don't think I realised that until I got out there. And it's nice to see that it is students are developing more and getting a bigger understanding of what everything is.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think that's it. I think that is now we see former students like you in so many different sectors. So we have people working with governing bodies, people working in the hospitality sector, people working in corporate sector. With like it's just so diverse now, and also shows a little bit of the skills that people can develop at the university, which can be transferable to many different tasks that we have that are needed in the events industry. So.
Oh, I completely agree. I've got friends who went to university that don't necessarily work in events anymore, but have gained all the skills and put them in a different direction. I know for myself personally, I've been in different sectors throughout the past sort of 10 years. I've been in sort of 3-4 different sectors and just sort of working my way through and seeing what I enjoy the most. So that has been really good. And yeah, what would you say, how have the students been affected?
There's a lot of changes really. I think obviously one is the lectures at this stage are all online. So we are having to provide more recorded material and then obviously, if you when you go to university, you would have 3 hours of lecture. Nowadays online, we cannot really ask the students to be 3 hours in a row in front of a computer. So the way the dynamics works a bit different. So a lot of what we are doing is pre-recording a lot of the content, and then when we go to the face-to-face or online, we just discuss the issues that we hope the students have seen on the other recorded videos and things like that. So obviously that's the change on the pedagogical approach to it. But there are changes that we had to make also. For example, you may remember that one part of our curriculum is the operational aspect, where students learn how to, try to put on an event and go from the planning, from the marketing, from the selling of the event, and to the delivery of the event and the analysis of the event. So usually that's our second year here in Scotland. So our first year in Scotland in our university's introduction, the second year is this operational year where students learn the steps and then deliver an event, and that the third year is a more strategic year with strategies and policies, and the fourth year is the development of the industries, the future of the industries, the international aspects. So this second year had to change considerably. The reason for that is we cannot ask students to organize, plan, and deliver a face-to-face event just now. One, because, as I said, the regulations and the public policies are changing fast. So we never know if we're going to have a lockdown or not. So it's very difficult to plan that with students. So in the last year, 2020, this year, all the events the second year students have to organize are online. The last year, 2020, obviously the students have to change because they started the year in 2019 planning for a face-to-face event. Then we got to January with COVID, and then February with COVID, everything had to change. So the students had to quickly adapt and change their proposal and things like that. But this year we had more time, and we knew from the beginning that the event they had to organize had to be an online event. So there are changes on that aspect in terms of how they had to rethink the type of service they offer. Now, obviously, there are things that are different to think about, right? So when you think about a face-to-face event, when you go to a concert or something like that, elements like insurance are very different from the elements of insurance of online events. Not that online events don't need insurance, and there's more and more evidence that online events also need insurance because of data protection or disruption or so, but it's very different from health and safety and risk assessments that we do for a live event. So a lot of these things need to come into play now, and we need to talk more to the students about. You may remember when you were doing probably your second year, we would talk about some of the tragedies in concerts and some of the big things that happen in terms of health and safety in events. These things are still important because the industry will go back to have those things. We're going to have festivals this year or next year, and things that are important. But we also now have people hacking Zoom, disrupting a lot of things that we didn't talk before. And we are learning now, and we are talking now, and we need to talk now, because it will be part of the reality, one thing or not, of the future as well. So everything that we are doing now in terms of online events is not going to disappear when things resume face-to-face. We're still going to be using a lot of hybrid, or because it's more cost efficient, or because climate change, or because both, but it is just the way we move forward.
I agree. I think it'll be that's a good way to put it, quite a hybrid way forward, because a lot of people are comfortable. Obviously, ideally, we would love to do this in the same room with you, but we're not allowed to. So doing it this way is how it will go forward, and I think it will happen quite a lot. Going on from there, how do you feel that events and hospitality, the industry as such, has been treated during the pandemic? Do you think it's been fair? Obviously, you've got an outside perspective of it, but even with students and things, do you think they've been treated fair, how it is having to work from home and things like that?
It's difficult to say, right? I think the concept of fairness there is quite tricky in terms of as an approach. The reality is, if you think about a public health perspective, right? People cannot move, because if people move, the virus spread. So on the basic knowledge of public health, that's a reality. We should move less, because the more we move, the more we get together, the more the virus spread. That's the bottom line, right? Now, if you think about or the hospitality and event sector and things like that, right? As places where people get together, it would always be impacted one way or the other. I always personally, and that's my personal view, I always thought that if you want to disrupt the chain of transmission and you want to make sure people don't move, you need to actually support them to not move. And supporting them to not move is to really, you close down everything, you make sure the businesses survive. So you need to really have a strong financial package, because, if not, you're going to really break the future of the whole industry. So you really need to have, now, I probably not qualified to say how much support is needed. There's probably economists or, people who understand the economy and things like that are probably better placed to understand how much support, financial support, should be given, right? But it is important to give financial support for the businesses, but also there's a lot of talk about how in many countries that were successful with the pandemic, they gave support for people to not get out of the house, right? So actually they financially supported people who tested positive to stay in the house. So they are encouraged to stay, right? So there's a lot of ways to see that, and there were good cases of good practice of how people tackled the pandemic in other countries before. It is complex, right? I do think that we could have done better in many senses, because if not, we wouldn't have seen the number of deaths that we saw, and we wouldn't see the number of businesses breaking and collapsing as we saw. So actually, we cannot say that we did well, right? I think that's unfair. Well, we didn't do well, or we are not doing as well as we could in UK and in Scotland and so on. But I don't. Yeah. Again, I think it's a complex discussion.
You've worded it in quite a nice way. It's been nice to get somebody's outside perspective on it as well, because obviously if we're talking to different people throughout these sort of talks that we're having, a lot of people are directly involved, and there's quite a lot of anger and upset and about that. A lot of businesses have closed, a lot of people being made redundant. So it's nice to see sort of from your aspect and how you think the students even have been sort of dealt with, and how they're dealing with it, sort of their mentality and their
I think the students' perspective is a bit different, right, in terms of future career. And the reason why is because there is a perspective that we cannot survive as a society and as a human beings without events or without tourism. It's part of who we are. It defines who we are. So one way or the other, the sectors will be there. People will still go in events in the future, right? Or people will still travel in the future, right? So if you are a student, you're looking, the situation is not good now, but we're gonna see concerts in a year, 2 years or in 3 years, we're going to see concerts, we're going to see fairs, we're going to see events, we're going to see conferences, we're going to see exhibitions, right? So on the student perspective, they know that the industry will bounce back, jobs will reappear because it's needed, right? So now the struggle is the people who are now in the sector, currently working, currently losing their jobs, currently losing their companies, right? And the fact is, if they cannot survive, if they cannot keep their company closed and survive, is because the support is not there. There's nothing to discuss. If I cannot keep my company open because I need to stay closed because it's a public health order, fine. But if I break, what can I do? It's because I haven't got the support. So it's difficult, and I appreciate that. And my work with the students is to help them to understand that events will bounce back, probably very fast, because people are desperate to get together, people are desperate to do things, people are desperate to engage. It's part of who we are as human beings. So events will be there. They will have to rediscover how they will present those events, sell those events, attract people, because that will be different. When we reopen the event sector, people will be scared. People will be scared, even if everyone is vaccinated. As soon as the first person coughs next to you, you'll be opa, right? Because you don't want anyone, you don't know.
Yeah, exactly, you don't know.
Right? So the way we present the event, the way you sell the event, the way you organize the event will be different, right? So we may see people checking temperature of people at the entrance of venues. We may see people, they're talking about an app now that will show that you had the vaccination or not. Who knows what will be in the future in terms of public policy. So events will be organized different. That may have a cost for future event organizers. So for the students that we're talking about now, they need to think about that, because when they organize their events in the future, the costs of organizing an event may be different.
So if you think insurance is going to be up and things like that, it's going to completely change.
If you think about a hybrid conference, right, which is everyone now is talking about hybrid conferences, where you have an element of face-to-face, but you also need to be online, live, and all these things. Like, the costing of that is different, right? In one side, the cost of that is different. On the other side, for the cities hosting those type of events, like Glasgow is a big hosts a city for large conferences. It will have an impact, because probably the number of participants may reduce. And if the number of participants reduce face-to-face, they may have a lower financial impact on the city, and then you'll have a ripple effect there. Okay? On the other hand, we also need to think about the positives, because the hybrid event may contribute you to somehow tackle climate change or contribute towards tackling climate change. You may reduce social inequalities and gender inequalities. A lot of people who could not travel to conferences were women who were on maternity leave. So on creating a hybrid opportunity, you allow women who are on maternity leave or who cannot travel because of childcare to be a part of the conference somehow, right? You may create countries from the global south, right? Countries who don't have as much money, or where the currency is very different. So from people coming from Brazil to here, the currency is huge, right? The difference. So it's a struggle for people to pay. So then you may become more inclusive because you are hybrid, but for the event organizer side and for the whole city, they need to understand the process. They need to understand the process where they need to make it financial in different ways. They may have more costs and so on. So we'll see how it will develop.
No, it's a very good point. Lashomo, you and I also listened to a conference that was based down south, and we logged in and watched it that way, and that's something that you and I would never have been able to go to. And it was one of the most interesting, insightful conferences that I've listened to probably ever, actually, and got to listen to somebody who is extremely knowledgeable and relatable, I would say he was. And I definitely have now followed on LinkedIn, and I'm sort of growing from everything that they've said. But like you said, it's been inclusive, because me being up in Scotland, I wouldn't have been able to go down to Newcastle for a 1 hour conference, you know.
Exactly. And it's not sustainable, is it?
Yeah.
Even if you get the train, it's not sustainable.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
You're totally right. So going on from there, how do you see us coming out of that? How do you see events and hospitality coming out? But also, how do you see students? Where's like university life going to go from 5 years' time? Do you think they'll become hybrid as well, or yeah?
I think okay. So two things. One thing is let's talk about the university first. I think the universities will go hybrid from now on. I struggle to see any difference on that. Any other, not difference, but any other possibility other than going hybrid. Now, how that hybrid will be, I don't know. I do think students benefit a lot to be in class, be on the campus, talk to each other, see each other face to face. There's a huge benefit on that. Yeah. On the other hand, I also understand that the way we live life today, as you said, is not always sustainable. To just travel to the campus for an hour lecture is not sustainable, not only in terms of environment, it's not sustainable in terms of social life, family, and so on. It's not inclusive, as I said. So I think I would see, I don't know, if I could guess, I would see myself in 3 years' time inside a classroom, teaching face-to-face, but being live transmitted online, and having to create online group discussions later as well and things like that. So that's how I would see. I think that's how it will be in the future. But again, we need to see how it will shape the sector. It involves not only the university itself, it involves government funding to higher education. So that would all play a role on the shape. The events and hospitality industry. I think what I hope is at short term, we're going to see a struggle. I think that things will come back at a pace, probably events and hospitality probably quicker than tourism. I think tourism will take a bit longer. It depends too much in other public policy of other countries and other parts of the country and things like that. One of my fears is large organizations will incorporate small businesses, because small businesses may break because of the current impact, and the large corporations that have more financial capital will just buy them, creating less diversity, creating issues in terms of, it becoming, too globalized, becoming, I don't think that I would like to see, it's nice to see independent small organizations growing and developing and having their market instead of all large multinational corporations who get their monies, take their monies to tax haven place and don't pay their taxes, right? So that's my fear. My fear is that small and medium organizations in events and hospitality may break and being eaten by large multinational corporations that don't contribute as much as small and medium and family businesses, for example.
Social enterprises and things, that's something I hadn't actually thought of, but it's a very, very valid point that they will hog quite a lot of the big things as well, whereas little companies won't get a foot in just because they don't have the money, whereas sort of pre-COVID there was enough for us all, really, but now, that's a very
I think that's my biggest fear. I think that would be a shame in many senses, right? Now, on the other hand, we are trying to educate our students more than your time on how to develop some kind of entrepreneurship thinking, how to develop some kind of views about developing their own businesses, their own strategies, and things like that. That's something that we've done a lot in the recent years. I usually say that it's always important for students to know what to do and where to work, right? But it's also very important for the students to know how to create their jobs, right? And there's something a little bit about that in terms of developing a mindset on the students that, sometimes if in the future there is a struggle, what can you do to create your own job in terms of reinventing yourself, and developing your entrepreneurial skills and things like that. So I think there is something about a bit of change on skill sets of students, and the type of graduates we're going to have in the future.
It's nice that you've acknowledged that as well, that so quickly you've said students need to change their mindset. That is a very positive thing.
I think one question that I really wanted to ask, just in regards to if there's anyone in the audience watching and maybe they don't even have an idea of what events is, like what does that look if you're studying it as a qualification, or could you just simply explain what events is? I think that'd be a cool thing to cover.
Okay, so when we think about events, right, we're talking about organized gatherings of people that is based on a specific time, for a specific meaning or a specific reason, involving organization, involving people working at it. So we're talking about organized gatherings for specific reasons. So when we're thinking about the events and commercialized, like a lot of them is commercialized somehow, right? It's not obvious. There's a lot of NGOs and other organizations who do events as well, but they are also organized and somehow commercialized as well. So when you think about studying events, because of these characteristics of events, we are talking about a business model to organize it. We are talking about a marketing model to promote it. We are talking about human resources model because it's labor intensive. So someone is behind the scene organizing it. We are talking about financial and accounting. So we're talking about the skills involved in accounting and finance and things like that. So it's basically a sector where every single area almost in a business school is involved, right? So if you think about our program, and most of the programs of events management around the country, they would have modules of almost every single area of the school. Like we have, for example, modules, and Rachel may remember, like related to business law, right? Or things regarding to law, because if you think about events, you need to follow law and legislation aspects. So when you look to the curriculum of events management, it is quite difficult and challenging to put that together, right? And it's challenging because it's a space to discuss everything that is involved in events, right? And it's challenging because it's also difficult to make sure that you contextualize everything for events, right? Because the students want to study events. They don't want to study business law, even if business law is very important for events, right?
I was like that. I didn't enjoy the law part, and then obviously it's everywhere.
So there is a lot of these things, and it's difficult. And obviously, the universities and the way current higher education is placed is problematic, because in order to mainstream knowledge and mainstream costs, they wouldn't hire events lecturer to teach you business law. They will get someone from business and talk about business law that will not always contextualize that to event. And then obviously we rely on the student and sometimes in tutors to explain the relationships, but it's always very difficult. So actually a lot of people don't think about how we organize education or events management education, but it's quite complex. First, because of the amount of fields we need to cover, right? From law to risk to safety to marketing to HRM to business to finance to everything, and contextualize everything for events. And then when you contextualize to events, well, it's very different if you're talking to a concert or a festival, or if you're talking to a conference, or an exhibition, right? Or a fundraising, or a wedding. So the complexity of it is very deep. So what we try to do is we need to give all the skills, right? There's no way to escape from all the skills from HRM, marketing, business, event specific. We try to contextualize the best we can to the events, giving as much examples as we can from the multiple areas within events. And then we rely on the student to be able to develop the critical thinking and the capacity to associate the fields. But yeah. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. And thank you so much for going into detail as well. Yeah, I was just quite aware that there may be some people watching that have no idea what exactly we're discussing. So I thought we should throw that in for them.
Yeah, but you know what? I think it's interesting discussion because sometimes we need to remember that ourselves, and we need sometimes to remember and tell the students that. Because one of the problems we face in education is the students sometimes don't understand why they are studying what they are studying and the relevance of that to their careers. And for us who are on the other side, it's obvious or sounds obvious, but for the learner perspective, it's not.
Yeah.
Right? And we all be learners at some point. And we are continuous learning and we continue to learn, right? And there are things that sometimes we just need to.
And an example of what you were saying as well, I remember in fourth year we did a lot of health and safety, and I was really interested and I really wanted to sort of go forward with that and learning about sort of high-end health and safety. But I always thought, if I'm doing an event, there'll be a health and safety person there. I don't really need to take it forward, whereas I'm so wrong. There's constantly, if we're on site or if we're out somewhere, we need to keep an eye out and keep an eye on what it is. And that's something that I was in the class, I was so interested in it, but I did think it's not really relevant to what I want to do. There will be somebody whose job is health and safety. So from what you're saying,
it doesn't take the responsibility of a good employee or a good staff to keep an eye for the thing. You know, it's the same about, oh, I'm not involved in the commercialization of the product. Mm-hmm. So if I see a good commercialization opportunity, we will not tell. Obviously, you need to, right? If you're working for a company and it's your responsibility and you need to do that, you know. Or it's the same about, for example, we are looking to a staff, and you want to embed some skills on that job descriptor. Well, you need to understand how things work, right, in terms of recruitment and recruitment processes and things like that.
Exactly, and that's kind of where you come into, you need to work with a good team. Like Dechomai, we're a great team. We play off one another. Lashomo, you and I are on the phone every day, constantly playing ideas off one another and working together. And you need to have a strong communicative team to be able to do that. Otherwise, people do just keep everything to themselves, and it's not beneficial at all.
Yeah. But no, I'm really excited to ask the next question just because of your background and as well as being a lecturer within events and tourism. So yeah, the question, I guess, is, you know, what are your thoughts on diversity in the industry? What does that look like? Has it improved? Has it not improved? Like, where do you see things currently as they stand?
I've been thinking about that question quite a bit. It's not the easiest question to answer. I think there is a movement, probably slower than we expected or we wanted in terms of diversity and inclusion in the industry. But I think there is a movement, and it comes from naturally, you know, some kind of social movement that we have in terms of diversity and inclusion in society. Now, if you tell me that we see much initiatives in the events industry to tackle diversity and inclusion, I would say some, at some levels. You know, you see things of actions like a woman in tourism. The Women in Tourism group is, you know, quite active, very interesting to see, you know. But it's something that we always discuss. So, for example, if you want to get gender elements, right, as a specific one, we used to have always in events education, more men teaching events than women, even if 90% of the students are women.
Yeah.
So how come most of the students that come are women, but then when you get to a point where you can teach, you're a man? Right? So there was an issue there in terms of gender, clearly,
Yeah.
in terms of education. And we see a lot of other issues in terms of diversity and equality that probably not as tackle, or not, there's not as many initiatives to encourage diversity and inclusion. And it is somehow um, problematic, I would say, and I don't think we should just pretend it's not happening. I think there is still a lot of exclusion. I think there is still a lot of prejudice. I think there is still a lot of issues in the industry. I'm from Brazil. You can see my accent is not perfect. People sometimes don't understand me, even if I try to work better. If I pretend that I never heard a joke about my accent, or if I never heard some kind of prejudice about the way I speak, I would be lying to you, even if so, and that's me on a very I'm a white male, right? That has all the privileges of an unjust or unjust society could give to a white male. Now, imagine, a woman or a black woman with a different accent, it's so we cannot ignore that.
Yeah.
We're still not doing enough.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think one of my roles as coming from an education perspective is to demonstrate injustice to the students, talk about injustice to the students, encourage them to be different, encourage them to be more inclusive. Now, you add that to all the other perspectives we discussed on the previous question, that we need to add that to the curriculum, right?
Yeah.
So I was actually discussing 2 weeks ago about, for example, the importance of having modules on social justice, importance of having modules that will discuss gender equality, a module that will discuss racism. So we talk about racism in society, and huge in events, right?
Yeah.
Let's not pretend it's not this huge in events, but then we brush it off in education.
Yeah.
We don't tackle it properly, right? We just pretend people know that racism is wrong, when actually we should really put the finger there and say, actually, let's understand what's the issue of systematic and systemic and corporate racism that we see, right? In organizations, in society, in behavior of people, and so on.
Yeah. No, that's really insightful. And I guess in some ways you've already answered my next question in regards to like what active changes then can be made, or where can someone start if they are looking to actively make that change?
Well, the first thing, I think the first thing is acknowledgement, right? It's acknowledgement, because even you can say, oh, he comes from Brazil. As I said, I'm still a white male. I'm still come from a middle class Brazilian. So, when I look to my peers and other people and people who struggled in society, and you understand their background. So we need to acknowledge privilege, and you need to acknowledge that actually, you probably benefited a lot from inequalities, and then on acknowledging that, then you support and encourage your behavior to change. So, I need to always constantly review my behavior as an educator, as a member of society, as a father, as a husband, to understand my role, and not be afraid of talking to students about that, right? And making students aware, acknowledging, and finding solutions in terms of, okay, yeah, we acknowledge there's a problem there. What are the ways that can we do to support oppressed people, excluded people, to achieve their their potential.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good. And I guess I'm quite curious from as you're a lecturer and as you're seeing this intake of students that are coming in, you're saying majority of women, what, maybe not numbers per se, but what are the percentages of like women from Black and ethnic minorities? I think that's quite, our audience would love to know what you've seen, like, especially over the years as well.
It's minority, right?
Yeah.
It's I would count in, like, if I can count on my hands the number of women from ethnic minority background, that would be it. So, and I think there is an issue as well. For example, you see STEM. So STEM does a lot of work in terms of including women because of lack of women on engineering, maths, and things like that. I don't think we do that enough in tourism. I don't think we do that enough in events. It's always concerned me in many ways how, as I said, we have those prejudices, a lot of them based on the embedded racism and prejudice of our clients, right? So, and we've seen that. I've seen that with lecturers coming from Black ethnic minority, who suffer way more prejudice on their accent than I do, right? And a lot of the companies need to really tackle that, because it is sometimes we tell the students will struggle to understand that person there. Let's not put them in front of the student. So you're actually reinforcing the racism and the prejudice that is within that customer group, right? And it's the same talking about, I'm doing some work now with the council here about tour guides, right? So when you think about tour guides, right? Yeah, one thing is you go to another country, right? And the tour guide is speaking in English with their own accent, right? But if you're in UK and you go to York and you get someone who's not British doing a tour guide for you, I can guarantee you that you're gonna raise concerns within the prejudice and racism that is within the society.
Yeah.
Can you get what I'm saying? So for me, one of the important things is a lot of people are scared about talking about that, right? And I don't think we should, right? We need to acknowledge that we are such an imperfect society. We are such an unjust society. We are such a society that still excludes refugees, asylum seekers, and all these other communities, that if we don't talk, we are damaging them even more, right? If we talk about, we acknowledge the problems, and then we try to educate and find solutions about. So yeah, but I think that's something that I would expect from my staff to talk about. We do have a huge group of international staff. Rachel knows, like, in our staff on the events and tourism group, we have someone from Iran, someone from Nepal. I'm Brazilian. We have Scottish. We have English. So we do have a diversity of people there, and they all enrich the students. They always bring their own perspective, their own views of the world, their own cultural background. And I think if students are open and have their hearts open, they will enrich and learn from there.
Even going back to when I was talking to you to begin with, and you were comparing how events are in New Zealand and Brazil to here, you wouldn't get that if we didn't speak to so many different types of people. And you, as my lecturer, my peer, my friend as such, I'm sorry to hear that people have sort of mocked your accents and things like that, because it's just a horrible thing to have to hear, and it's really nice to see how much you are talking about it, because it's not, and how you're trying to sort of evolve the curriculum as such and bring it into modules, because it's so important. It's not
I think my biggest fear is like, I'm a vocal, educated person, right? And up to a level I can fight my corners.
Yeah.
What concerns me is when people silence others, students silencing other students, right? Students shaming other students, or students, causing issues to staff who are new staff, who are still not confident or still developing, and undermining their professional development. You know what I'm saying? So I think there's something there for us to have our eyes open to that, because the only way to tackle these things is to call it as it is. If you see an act of racism, call it racism, and you tell them, right, that that's not what you do, and that's the damage they're doing. Um, and it's the same about issues with gender and things like that. A lot of people would, how many jokes you may have heard about events is for women. Is that not a type of prejudice?
That's true. And what the prejudice is events is very pigeonholed. Women do a certain type of event role, men do a certain types of event role. There's never, events is an industry. Why can't we all do a bit of everything? Because women are mainly office based, men are mainly out and about. So why can't we cross over? Do you know? And it's just, that's what you naturally go and do, and it shouldn't be that way.
It's prejudice, right? Because if you go to someone and you say to someone, what do you do? Oh, I work with business development. You could say I'm working with business development, and you're an events manager, right? Or you see some jobs in events now that are called account manager, right? Because the whole, right? And that sounds very different for a lot of people with prejudice on their eyes. Then you say, oh, I'm an events manager, because they say events manager, say, oh, you are a wedding coordinator, as is something demeaning, and it's not.
Yeah.
There's nothing demeaning about being a wedding coordinator, because you're making the happiest day of the life of a couple. That's the best thing you can do, right? It's the biggest contribution you can give is the plan and help the couple to have the most spectacular day they can have, right? Yeah. But then people just put negative connotations in unless you are a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer, it seems that everything else doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think it's really refreshing as well that you said, we do have to start having conversations and really calling things out as we see them. Is it a comfortable conversation? Probably not, but it does have to be had. And I think it's really refreshing to know that you are in the position that you are, with the mindset that you have, ready, I guess, to challenge some of these things. So yeah, it's one step at a time, I think, overall. And I have no doubt for our audience that are listening in as well, they'll be, I guess, in some ways relieved to know, hey, there are people out there, fighting for these causes, regardless of sometimes even pushback and feedback, because again, it's for women in this industry, for someone of color in this industry as well, we know that it's there. Yeah. And to not acknowledge it is, it's kind of crazy otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. So
thank you for your passion, because your passion has really come through about not only events but students, but also the diversity and sort of evolving. I think it's really come through about how passionate you are and how much you've just acknowledged it. People do tiptoe around, and it's needed. People need to see it, and you are in a very senior position and you are shouting about it, and it gives us a lot of confidence, doesn't it, that we're going in the right direction, albeit, as you said, a wee bit slowly, but hopefully it'll quicken up and we're getting there, definitely.
And I think that's the thing, and I think, as we evolve as human beings and as a society, I think there's a problem of stigma as well, right? So we need to be careful to not stigmatize or the other day I was invited to be a speaker on a panel, which was a manel, right? Which was a panel full of men. And I got the email saying, look, would you be coming to talk to this panel? I was like, yeah, obviously. And then they sent me an email, and there was 3 men on the panel. And then I emailed one of the guys. I like, well, you should have a woman there. Why not? But I'm not the organizer, right? And so then they promoted that online, and the people were commenting. And then I engaged with one of the organizations that was it's like, guys, I agree with you, right?
Yeah.
I agree with you. You should have a woman, including if you want my space on the panel, get me out of the panel and put a woman, because actually it's not that you won't find any woman to talk about the topic. There's lots of them. It's just about you wanting to have a woman on the panel, right? And I think that's a little bit of and I don't think the organizers did in bad faith. They did because it's the prejudice or there are things that are embedded inside them, right? We are organizing. You may have seen we organize for the center as well, like things like you are doing now, right? Which is conversations and chats with people specialists in different areas. And we did one, and there was 3 men talking, right? But it's part of a series. And if you look to the series in general, like there was 50-50 split, right? So when someone called, oh, there's 3 men talking about that, like that is true, probably not ideal, but if you look to the series as a piece of work, you will see that there are conversations happening between 2 women, it's part of the process and as an overall, right? Yeah, maybe we should have a woman in everyone, and maybe it is a way of actually demonstrating and giving way more voice than it should. Maybe it shouldn't be 50-50. Maybe it should be 75 in favor of supporting women, because for too many years they've been silenced, right? So talking about 50-50 doesn't correct the injustice of hundreds of years of injustice. But this conversation needs to be done, knowing that sometimes we make a mistake, and if you are humble enough and say, actually, thank you for pointing out it was a mistake, it was an error, and let me fix, and it is part of how we develop as a humans.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that I think, like you're saying, just reinforcing that I think we are evolving, and hopefully as going forward. But carry on, Michelle. Sorry, just talked over you.
No, it's all right. Just want to say thank you again. We are just wrapping up, I guess, with our conversation here. And for those of you watching, we're so glad that you can join us for this moment. Hopefully you've taken bits and bobs from here. And please do leave us comments and feedback as well. But join us for our next conversation, which will be coming out shortly as well.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.